right, this is Mr. Goldberg, International Business. Let's get going. 1.5, Globalization. So much to talk about. Okay, so what is globalization? It's the process where economies and cultures become integrated through, gotta learn how to talk here, new global communication technologies, that's one, foreign direct investment, which we talked about last video, international trade, immigration, the flow of money. Okay, so it began shortly after World War II when we have the establishment of the United Nations, or the UN. And probably because of that, we had better trade relations between nations. There's been a huge growth in international business transactions over the years, and also the size, reach, and power of major corporations. We'll get into that a little later. All right, so we have the development of globalization. We have global corporations beginning to develop. So companies whose names are known pretty well throughout the world. The pace of globalization has increased dramatically because of several recent changes, including access to cheap labor in other countries, especially from the Canadian or North American perspective, and less restrictive rules and regulations for businesses, and just generally speaking, more open trade policies, which we in Canada support. So then the tax looks into the top companies in the world. So Fortune magazine produces a list of the top 500 companies every year called the Fortune 500. Usually comes out in the summer, usually a huge edition. But you've got it here, but it's from 2017, which is really old. So have a look at those companies. What's interesting is how international the companies are. Okay, and then what I did was I went and I updated that list from a couple of years ago. Again, it's 2023 right now. So in 2021, most of those companies, if not all, I believe all of them are American. Okay, Walmart, Amazon, Apple, and so on. And this is the list, subtle change there, from this summer's edition, 2023. So we have Walmart, Amazon, Exxon, gas company, Apple. And Apple was number 3 there before. CVS is a very big, it's sort of like Shoppers Drug Mart, but in the States, very big drugstore in the States. Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, on and on. Alphabet, which is the corporate name of Google, and another oil company there, Chevron. So any difference, a big difference between the 2017 list, not so much from a couple of years ago. All right, then the book goes on to talk about the top global brands, but the top growing brands. And I don't know if that's the best metric to look at. So what I did was I updated this. So again, it's from 2016, so it's kind of ancient. So I updated this with the top global brands, and this is from an organization or company called Interbrand, and I've used them for years, and they have lots of good free resources too, which is nice. So they put a value on the brand, not necessarily the company. So Apple wasn't the top company, but their brand is the top, is considered the top brand as of 2022. And there's no 2023 chart yet. I'm guessing it's coming out in the next couple of months or so. And again, well, actually, if you look at brands, they're not all American. So we have Samsung here from South Korea, and Mercedes-Benz, and Louis Vuitton, and BMW, and all that on. Okay, SAP. So we use SAP here in the Toronto District School Board, but on the side, most of you can't see. Okay, so positive effects of globalization. So look at the positives and negatives. So positives are outsourcing. I guess that's a positive in that you can get cheap labor, for instance, in other parts of the world. Or if you have a problem to solve, you can get that problem solved somewhere else, usually really cheap. So for example, I have a friend that has a tutoring business, and instead of just using Zoom, he wanted to develop his own platform that included scheduling, and it's a really neat platform. And he told me he hired, I think it's 2 or 3 programmers from Mexico, and they did a really good job. And I've used the platform, and it's fantastic. And it's his platform. It's like one guy in Toronto doing this, but he hired these people, and it makes his company look really slick. And it was done at a very reasonable cost. All that from outsourcing. If he were to do that sort of thing here, he probably would have paid triple, if not 5 times, what he paid the people in Mexico. So lower prices because of that, decrease in poverty, and that's kind of an ideal. Innovation happens for sure with globalization because we get the best of everyone in every part of the world. Optimal use of resources. So yeah, if you have if you have a business and it uses some element for some source of good from another part of the world, then you can just open up a plant in that part of the world and be closer to the resources there. Just banging something on the table here. Better jobs, and that's from, again, the Canadian perspective. Increased capital flow, so increased flow of money, especially transactions now are so easy to do internationally because we have things like e-transfers and so on. And of course, there's lots of negative effects of globalization. So we have lost jobs. So we talked in class about how clothing manufacturing jobs just don't exist here when it used to be a huge industry here in Canada. And that's the same for many others. And then there's also the fear of lost jobs. So, if you're in an industry where you see lots of jobs moving to other parts of the world, you could be afraid that someone's going to take over your job and for a lot cheaper. Loss of Canadian productivity because people are doing lots of the work in other parts of the world. Exploitation of cheap labor. So this is a really bad situation. So yeah, the labor is cheap in other parts of the world, but is it at the expense of some social issues? Like, is it because of people in distress working or child labor, or you get into all sorts of bad situations like that, which are terrible once you actually realize what's happening. A lot of it is hidden, unfortunately. Increased pollution, because again, environmental standards would be different in other parts of the world. They're very strict here, but not necessarily in other places where they're looking to get the business. There could be safety concerns. Our safety protocols and regulations are very extensive. Might not be that way in other countries. Some countries it might be tougher too. Spread of diseases in your book, which is interesting. I put the exclamation because just experienced that in the last few years with the pandemic. So that happens too, globalization. But pandemic happened, over 100 years ago too. So who knows about that? But it's not just a pandemic. Increase in the income gap. So yeah, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. That's that old thing, unfortunately. And we have the influence of the multinational corporation, or the MNC, on government. So yeah, you have some companies, many companies that are larger economically than some countries or many countries. Companies like Amazon and Alphabet and so on. They're huge. So here are your questions. Bit of a shorter section here, which is nice. What does outsourcing mean? Number 2, according to the World Bank, what percentage of the global population lives on less than $2 a day, $2 American dollars a day? And is poverty increasing or decreasing? What were the Panama Papers? And some of this is in the text, not necessarily in this video, so you might have to look back at your text for that. Excuse me. I'm losing my voice here. What are some of the problems facing large international businesses like Google or Alphabet with regard to globalization? It really should say Alphabet because the company's Alphabet, so that's really taken from the text before that change was made. What is populism? How does it affect international business? That's an interesting question. What does the term Brexit refer to? We've talked about that a little in class already. And what does TPP stand for? Which country withdrew from the TPP? Also in the text. Pretty please. No, that's not what it stands for. Text, pretty please. All right. This has been Globalization, and I'm Mr. Goldberg. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget, save your money, 10% of it. Can't say it enough.